This is my ranger in gw2. He uses a longbow and greatsword. Used to use axe. Axe is a ranged weapon, a thrown weapon on the ranger, but they made changes recently to the axe that I don't really like, so I switched to longbow and greatsword, which match up well. They're both power weapons, direct damage weapons, and I really like the greatsword on the ranger. So now we're escorting this NPC here with some other people. I'm using a spider here. You can get all kinds of pets in the game. It's the pet class. Necromancers sort of have pets, you could say. You can make it so that you have these undead minions who follow you around, but it's not quite the same. The pets, they're okay. They've been improved. They're better than they used to be. They have some quirks. You got to learn to sort of micromanage them a bit to get the most out of them. It's a little hard if you have really tough enemies because they won't get out of AoE and they won't dodge attacks, and you really got to dodge things in this game. So that's maybe a drawback to the ranger. Pretty popular class though. A lot of people like the pet class, and there are some people who want to have a ranger with no pet. They want an option to get rid of the pet. But it'll really never happen. I really don't think it's ever going to happen because, as I mentioned in other videos, every profession, every class or profession as they call it in Guild Wars 2, has a profession mechanic. Like it's elemental attunements for the elementalist, it's kits for the engineer, it's death shroud for the necromancer, and for the ranger, it's the pet. And I'm probably going to switch to greatsword in a little bit here. The champion dodges blind. Yeah, a lot of people want that, but about 35% of your damage is pet. So if they get rid of the pet, they got to somehow give that to the ranger. There's all sorts of problems. Here's the greatsword. Really like this. Using my fire trap there. Rangers get traps. You put them on the ground. They're triggered when someone walks into them. And if you drop it right on an enemy, then it'll go off immediately. So I put down that trap when I was right there, so it went off immediately because I was right next to the enemy. But I don't see him getting rid of the pet. Basically, don't make a ranger if you don't want to have a pet. And they're pretty cool. It's kind of fun. It's like another part of the game. If you make a ranger going around the maps and hunting for different pets that you can tame, that's what you gotta do. You gotta find young animals, juvenile animals they're called. You can name them after you tame them. You can give them a name, but you'll be looking for animals in the world that are called juvenile spider, juvenile brown bear, whatever. And I like the spiders for a ranged enemy, a ranged pet, rather, or a ranged pet. And I tend to like drakes for melee pets, but dogs and cats are good in melee. Cats are probably the highest damage. I love birds. I like the avian pets, but they don't seem so great in PvE. They swoop around a lot before they attack and they're pretty fragile, but they're really cool. Every once in a while I go back and use one of my avians, but not too much. I don't find them as useful as the other pets. So this is the longbow, and I mentioned in another video, I like it, but I like the warrior longbow so much better. The longbow for the ranger, I mean, it has some cool abilities, but I find that I have to use the auto attack a lot more because, well, the number 5 attack is a good AoE. It's a nice AoE. Maybe a little bit of a long cooldown for me, but I'm always sensitive about long cooldowns. What's long to me might not be long to someone else. The number 2 attack is a nice DPS attack, a nice damage attack. The 3 and 4 are much more utility, and they're good, they're useful. But, I don't know, I just always feel like on the ranger I'm using the auto attack more than I really want to. But it's okay. I mean, in this game, in a way, the design of it, I mean, you have 5 attack skills. So this isn't like, World of Warcraft or Star Wars The Old Republic, where you get tons of skills, and you can get a pretty involved rotation. This is a game where auto attack is actually kind of important. You really are supposed to be using auto attack more in this game. It's just the design of it. You know, you get 5 skills. So now let's see, we're going to go to the next stage of this event. We will probably have a ton of enemies coming. Maybe I'll go back to my bow for a bit here. I'll be using a lot of bow in this.
Refreshing.
So, one thing about the weapons in Guild Wars 2, like the longbow, let's take that for an example. My warrior, you have to kind of look at the attacks, is what it comes down to. Look at your attacks for your weapons, for whatever character it is you have. Well, in the warrior, it's a condition damage over time weapon primarily. And for the ranger, it's a direct damage weapon. So when you buy a longbow for your warrior, for example, you want to get a longbow that has stats that boost condition damage. And if you're getting a longbow for your ranger, you want to buy one that has stats that boost direct damage. And that goes the same for all weapons. You know, just because 2 different professions use the same weapon doesn't mean that they need the same stats, really. Boy, aggro was kind of weird in this game. Like, I just got attacked by stuff really far away behind me. I don't know how I drew threat on those. But this is a game, you know, like I said, without, I said this before, they don't have the hard trinity. You don't have tanks and healers and DPS. And the aggro tables, the threat tables, are kind of weird. It's like, it's pretty much known that if you have very high toughness on your armor, if your character has high toughness, that tends to draw a lot of threat. But it's not nearly so clear-cut as most games are. It's kind of an oddity with the game. So I sometimes find that I will draw threat on an enemy way far away from me for reasons I can't figure out. Here's somebody's down. Let's see if we can get them up.
We heal as one.
Try to find an excuse to use my greatsword soon. If your AoEs ever hit like a destroyable object, but don't actually destroy it, your pet will continue to attack that. I've seen that happen. I've used the AoE attack on the bow to get to a group of enemies, and it touched like a weapon rack or something that could be destroyed. And yeah, now see, where's my pet? What's he doing? There he is. Sometimes you got to call your pet back, but then my pet would go and attack the weapon rack until it was destroyed, unless I would tell him to come back to me. So sometimes you'll wonder where your pet is, and that's what's happened. This was a class that I liked pretty much from the start. Some, like the Mesmer, I didn't. I thought it was going to be terrible. Ended up being really fun. The Ranger is pretty fun right from the start. It always takes me a while to determine what weapon sets I really like. Gotcha stuff there. Great sword. Oddly enough, I like the longbow better on the Ranger. On the Warrior. I like the longbow better on the Warrior and the greatsword better on the Ranger. So I don't even use the greatsword on my Warrior. Fire trap again. If you make a Ranger, don't neglect melee, because this game does not have true ranged and melee classes, because everyone, every profession, every class can be ranged or melee. And you're kind of shortchanging yourself if you neglect one. The only class I really kind of do that on is the Mesmer. I like the sword for melee. It's really the only melee is the main hand sword. But it feels a little weird and inappropriate. It's a pretty fragile class. And I find myself most often just using my ranged weapon on the Mesmer. But I have the urge to somehow make it work better for me in melee. It's pretty cool. The sword's pretty cool. I'll show that in another video. using the sword. That's the melee combination I like for the mesmer is sword in the offhand too. And the greatsword I like on the mesmer as well, but that's actually a ranged weapon. It's not a melee weapon. So anyway, that's enough for this. I'll leave that off here. And yeah, if you like a pet class, Ranger's pretty cool. You got a lot of pets to choose from. You don't just get one. You can find a whole bunch all throughout the world. And it's a pretty fun class.